straight up. You got your ass kicked.
Don't be conservative. Tell me I got my ass kicked.
You
that's
did.
What I want to hear.
42 points. Do I need to say anything else?
What happened in this game? I don't think Draymond should have been suspended at all.
Are you out of your damn mind? You are out of your damn mind.
Hey, Josh, can you smell?
Really?
Back to SmackDown.
And completely stolen Cody Rhodes' WrestleMania moment. This is total. No, you don't get to talk right now.
Oh, really?
No.
You don't get to talk.
No.
I am projecting. That's what I do with the media. You guys are afraid to put your freaking takes out there. Yes, that's what I'm doing.
You, again, just
you
like...
know how sports media works? This is my job. It is a Tuesday at 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, which means it is time for another edition of Championship Rings. Football season is here, and the host of Brandon's World, Brandon Lewis, alongside the host of the Sports Room Talk Show, Mr. Ungar to the Max. We are here to talk about Week 1 in the NFL, Week 1 in college football, professional wrestling, and more, Josh.
Yes. Before we get too far into it, I just want to take a minute to send our condolences to the family of both Johnny and Matthew Gaudreau, who were tragically killed last week by a drunk driver. I believe it was the day before their sister was supposed to walk down the aisle. Johnny had just started his career with the Columbus Blue Jackets. Prior to that, he was with the Calgary Flames for a number of years. Matthew Gaudreau was in the AHL doing some great things. And so we just want to send our condolences, and yeah.
Yeah, that was when I saw that news on, I believe it was Friday morning. What absolute killer just way to start. And again, as Josh said, prayers to their entire family.
I swear the Columbus Blue Jackets are a cursed franchise, because a couple years ago, if you remember, Matisse Kiplenix, their goaltender, was killed in a fireworks accident, and now you have this. I'm just like, are the Blue Jackets cursed or something? I don't get it.
Wow. No, I don't remember that, but horribly horrific. And unfortunately, we do have to move on. Unfortunately, we do have to talk about sports tonight. We are going to get into Week 1 of the NFL, as I mentioned. We are going to get into Week 1 of college football. But we are going to start it off because our hometown Cleveland Browns, Josh, they have a new stadium name. We know there's been new stadium names in all sports all over the country as of like the last 3-4 years. Huntington, I don't know. I don't know. Are you with me on this? It doesn't feel like it fits Cleveland.
Huntington Bank Field. I mean, I'll tell you what. When the Browns said they had a special announcement, everybody thought it was going to be either them announcing that they're going forward with the Brook Park plan or they're going forward with renovating their current stadium. So this kind of feels like a bit of a letdown. You know what I mean?
I will say that Mary Kay Cabot tweeted out 10 minutes prior to the event that the news was not about the potential renovation or the moving of a dome. So, unless you didn't see it on Twitter, which again, I know a lot of people aren't on there anymore, whatever the case may be, X if you will. But that was kind of squashed before the event happened. And yeah, again, it's all about the money in this case. Huntington Bank, I'm sure, paid a premium. It's the same thing as, American Airlines Arena in Miami has been renamed like 5 different times within the past 2 years. We know here in Cleveland, the Q got renamed to Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse. Formerly Jacobs Field is now Progressive Field. it goes with the territory. It's going to get used to saying Huntington Bank Field, just like it took some time to get used to First Energy Stadium. But I just feel like no matter where they go, right? No matter if it's on the lake, no matter if it's that dome, Cleveland Browns Stadium, for whatever reason, to me, has felt like the perfect name for that situation, for this fan base. Because as I told you, Josh, regardless how we both feel about, the professional football team in our hometown of Cleveland, Ohio, the Browns fans may be unapologetically the most passionate fans in all of sports.
I can you can make an argument for that. Um, it's interesting that you mentioned how like fans are still going to call it Cleveland Browns Stadium because I hear a number of fans still call Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse as the Q.
And so do I.
Yeah, and I feel like I still hear a number of fans call it Jacobs Field instead of Progressive Field. Maybe not as much, but I feel like that's still a bit of a
Yeah, that I agree. I think it's mostly, it all depends on eras, right? I have said that the 4 years that we went to war, and don't mistake it, we did go to as literal war as you could with a basketball team with the Golden State Warriors. Those were the best 4 years of Cleveland Cavaliers basketball we may ever see in our lifetime. Um, I do feel that the 95 and 97 and throw 96 in there if you want, those Indians teams when they were the Indians back then, those runs may be the greatest era of Indians baseball we may have ever seen, and we weren't alive for it.
you
So,
could throw 2007 and 2016 into the mix.
but you could, but those were sort of one-off years. They weren't consecutive like they were 95, 96, 97. Those teams were prohibitive favorites. They probably would have won the World Series in 94 if it wasn't for the strike. So I'm looking at it from an era perspective. I think in Cleveland, definitely in our lifetime, right? The last 4 years have been the best the Browns have been in the best 25 years. And I think in this new era now, as hopefully the Browns are going to work to turn it around this season, I think whichever stadium is the name when the Browns eventually do, and I do believe someday in life the Browns will get back and go to the Super Bowl for the first time in franchise history. That's what people will call that stadium, whether it's Huntington Bank or whatever it will be.
Yeah, because you know what everybody just calls Cleveland Browns Stadium, First Energy Stadium, Huntington Bank Field? Factory of Sadness.
You are right on that. Well, there's going to be one fan base sad on Thursday night. There's going to be another fan base that's going to be happy. Listen, Thursday night, we already know Ravens at Chiefs, AFC Championship rematch. And Josh, with the Kansas City Chiefs seemingly in the head of Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens, Lamar is 1-4 lifetime in his career against Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. Is this already a must win for Baltimore, at least psychologically?
I would say yes. Um, and not, I would say it's not just a must win for Baltimore, but kind of a must win for the rest of the AFC. And let me explain what I mean. Because Patrick Mahomes has basically become like the boogeyman. Like, if you want to get to the Super Bowl in the AFC, you have to go through Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. It doesn't matter if it's in your stadium or if it's in Arrowhead. You have to go through Kansas City. And Joe Burrow has and Tom Brady have, have basically been the only two quarterbacks who have been able to get through Mahomes to either reach and win a Super Bowl or at least reach a Super Bowl in the case of Joe Burrow. So for Thursday night, I would say it's not just a must win for Baltimore, but it's a must win for the rest of the AFC. If you
Well,
get where I'm coming from.
a little bit, but I'll say this. So, Kansas City, I want to flip to the other side of the ball real quick. Kansas
Go
City
ahead.
They have two games in the AFC North to start the season. They are hosting the Ravens, and in week two, they are hosting Cincinnati. And if you watched our NFL predictions last week, you know that I believe that that is an AFC championship game preview. If the Chiefs make it out of both those games 2 0, the NFL is in a whole lot of trouble. Those are two very hard games to start the year. I don't think they're going to do that. I think if they beat Baltimore, they probably lose to Cincinnati. I think if they lose to Baltimore, they'll probably beat Cincinnati. I think this is 100%. I don't know about if you lose, your season's over for Baltimore because you still got Lamar Jackson and those, pieces on both sides of the ball. But psychologically, if you're Baltimore, you have a bad taste in your mouth from last year's AFC Championship game where you held the Chiefs to 17 points. I don't even remember. I think it was the Kansas City did not even score in the second half of that game, and they
I'm
still
pretty sure you're right.
won the game. Remember, there was that weird play where Baltimore was down. I think it was 17-3. I could be a little bit wrong on the score, but it was like going into the fourth quarter, and Zay Flowers fumbles the ball at the goal line, or it would have changed the entire portion of the game. That is something that Baltimore now mentally is going to have to overcome. Because I'll tell you this, what's going to be mentally troubling for the Baltimore Ravens will be if Lamar Jackson plays his arse off. He does his typical 275 throwing, rushes for 50 yards, plays a lot better than he did in the AFC Championship game, and they still lose. Whether it's by a touchdown, a field goal, a safety, they get blown out. However it is, they lose. If Lamar Jackson plays well and the Chiefs win, Baltimore's in trouble. If Lamar Jackson plays horrible and the Ravens still lose, it'll be like, oh, Lamar, he can't play well against good teams. He struggled against Buffalo in his career. He has struggled against Pittsburgh in his career. He has struggled against Kansas City. So now I think you look at, will the addition of Derrick Henry make a big impact for them on the offense side of the ball in this game? We know the Chiefs have one of the hardest training camps in the NFL with Andy Reid. We know their starters maybe played more of the preseason than any other team. We know Baltimore starters barely played. What will that factor bring to the table? But I just think the Ravens have to play with urgency. If they lose by a field goal and they don't play their best game, I don't think it's the end of the world. But if they look sloppy or Lamar does not look good, then yes, there could be ramifications for this game because as I've been preaching, and I preached last week on our prediction show, the NFL is not linear. You don't get better year to year to year. Some years you're better than others. Some years you're worse than others. Every year, week one is a different animal. Teams don't play in preseason anymore. Week one is basically a crapshoot, but there's a lot of pressure here on the Ravens to get over that proverbial hump.
Yeah. It like I was saying on our predictions show last week, it's the Ravens defense that I'm really interested in. Think about it. They lost Patrick Queen to their biggest rival in the Pittsburgh Steelers. They lost their defensive coordinator, Mike McDonald, to the Seattle Seahawks, where he's now the head coach. And they have some other holes on that defense. But we know Baltimore's always had a great defense. Are they going to continue having that this season? Or can Kansas City maybe expose some holes on that side of the ball?
No, that's a good point, right? Because they go from Mike McDonald, who again revamped that secondary last year. He's now the head coach in Seattle. To Zach Orr, who was on the Ravens staff, but he is the youngest defensive coordinator in football, and his first assignment is going to be going up against Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, who are going to have McCall Hardman. For everything I've read, they're going to have Rashid Rice. Travis Kelce is still going to be there. You have the rookie Xavier Worthy. And you know Andy Reid in September. We know how good Andy Reid is in December. Well, Andy Reid's just as good in September. Andy Reid always comes out with new tricks to begin the year, and Steve Spagnuolo is going to have the defense playing well like he did right out of the gate last year. Is Baltimore, and John Harbaugh is a very good coach, but is Baltimore going to be prepared for the wrinkles that Kansas City will throw in? Because I promise you they will.
Yeah. Um, and Kansas City won't even have Marquise Brown for this game. If I'm pretty
Oh,
sure.
that's a good point. You're right. No, you are right on that.
So that is a key offensive piece that's out for Kansas City. But again, you mentioned it. They're still gonna have Xavier Worthy. They're still gonna have Travis Kelsey. They're still gonna have Rashee Rice, even though I don't agree with that decision for him to be out on the field. But that's a whole nother story. Um,
Don't forget about Juju Smith-Schuster coming over.
yep, Juju is back, and we know what he did when he was with Kansas City originally.
And you got Pacheco in the running game.
Exactly. So it's like you have all these weapons for Patrick Mahomes to play with, and then you look over at Baltimore, other than Derrick Henry and Mark Andrews, I guess, and you have basically three weapons when you look at Baltimore's offense outside of Lamar Jackson. You have Zay Flowers, you have Mark Andrews, and you have Derrick Henry.
I'd throw Rashad Bateman in there.
I feel like he needs to have like he had a good season last year. I want to see him do it again before
Duvernay is another decent receiver, so
you you do make a valid point, but it's like I wouldn't say Duvernay and Bateman are established weapons
okay.
quite yet. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say they're established weapons in the same vein as like a Juju Smith-Schuster or a Marquise Hollywood Brown.
Maybe in that Kansas City system, I mean, I would probably take Duvernay over Juju if it wasn't in a Kansas City system with Patrick Mahomes, my quarterback.
Okay, you, you know what? That's a fair assessment there. Like maybe someone we saw that Juju was not the same wide receiver when he was in New England.
Well,
And
it's New England. I mean, come on.
okay, fair. But like McCole Hardman, the guy who ended up catching the game-winning touchdown pass.
He barely could see the field for the Jets. Comes back to Kansas City, and it goes back to coaching in this league.
Exactly. That's my point, though. Is like when you're in that Kansas City system, you kind of look better than you're supposed to. It's kind of like when when got, you had wide receivers nobody had heard of playing in New England, and you're like, who's this guy? And he's making big catches for Tom Brady in the Super Bowl. You know what I mean?
Yes. Let's make a prediction on this game, Josh. You got Ravens or you got Chiefs?
I gotta go with the Chiefs in this one. They're the defending champs. They're at home. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think this game, though, is going to be a little bit like the AFC Championship games in terms of, I don't think it's going to be too high scoring. I think it's going to be like a 24-21 type game. Kansas City is favored by 2.5 to 3, depending on which betting market you look at, which to me is about right. You know, they could win by a touchdown, I suppose, but I think it's a pretty close and low scoring route.
I could see it being like a 24-21 type game, maybe.
Well, speaking of must win, the Friday night game streaming on Peacock in Brazil, which who knows why the hell the NFL is even having this game in Brazil. If you've been seeing what's been going on in Brazil during the past few days when it comes to the wildfires, and now they have, this whole charade going on with Elon Musk and X. There's not going to be any tweets in the press box. And Eagles players and Packers players have both said they've been told to not go into their hotel room. So this thing seems like a mess. But to answer the question on the screen for my Philadelphia Eagles, I do think this game needs to be a sense of urgency. It needs to be a sense of turn the corner. And again, you're higher on the Packers. We know this year than I am. I think that this Eagles team is going to be really good this year. And I do think it starts Friday night. I think Jalen Hurts needs to set a tone. I think Saquon Barkley is going to have a big running game in this game because I think Kellen Moore is going to want to feature Saquon Barkley and his new toy, a guy that we have never seen with this many white boxes we at least hope for in terms of A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and the weapons Philadelphia has on the outside. I think you're going to see guys like Bryce Huff on the defensive line, Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter really show that youth movement. The Eagles secondary now, Quinyon Mitchell is going to get a lot of rotating snaps. You have Cooper DeJean, Darius Slay, Kiwi Ringo, Isaiah Rogers. They're more deep in the secondary than they were a year ago. I think it's going to take a little bit of time for that Vic Fangio defensive scheme to implement, which is why I think Green Bay will have some success moving the football down the field. I think this is going to be a close, down to the wire game. I think Philadelphia, again, I think they need to show some stuff. I do think they need to win this game psychologically, getting over what happened at the collapse of last year. And I'm just going to say it. I got Philly, but I think it's close. I'll go a little bit more high scoring than the game on Thursday night. I'll go 27-24. Philly favored by 2.5. They barely cover.
Okay, so I've seen some talking heads in the media saying there's a potential the Eagles could miss the playoffs entirely. I don't know if you've seen that at all. But,
I have.
Okay. I'm sure you don't agree with that. And I believe both of us had the Eagles winning this division when we made our prediction special last week.
Yes, we both had them at 12-5, and we both had them. You had them as the 3. I had them as the 2.
Okay. And I have the Packers in the playoffs. I believe you did not.
I did not. That was the team I had just missing the playoffs.
Okay. Which I think that's a fair assessment for you. You weren't as high on what you saw from Jordan Love because you felt like it was too small of a sample size, which I'll give you this. Maybe I bought a little too much into the hype. We'll have to see how it plays out this season because, now that teams had a whole offseason, they can adjust their game plans on how they want to play against Jordan Love.
As well as I know from a year ago, we saw, the Eagles fly high in 2022, 2023. They immediately, week 1, New England and Bill Belichick made the change. They're going to play 2-high safety. They're going to force Jalen Hurts to make a read post-snap. Like you have said, teams now have film on Jordan Love. And I like Matt LaFleur. I think he's a very good offensive coach. But we will see what wrinkles Green Bay has to throw in because here's the thing that I think Philly has the advantage of in this game. They don't just have one new coordinator, they have 2. And it's not like Baltimore where they're sort of keeping the same scheme. At least offensively, this will be a completely different scheme than what the Philadelphia Eagles ran a year ago.
That brings up an interesting question for me. And I want your opinion. So, knowing that the Eagles are going to be running a completely different offensive system and defensive system this season, what film do you think the Packers have been watching this week? Like, are they watching stuff that Kellen Moore has run in both Dallas and Los Angeles? Are they watching film of what Vic Fangio did in Miami?
I'll tell you for sure they're watching film of what Vic Fangio did in Miami because the Vic Fangio defensive scheme has been pretty much implemented all over the league. I will tell you that when it comes to the offense scheme, I think it's going to be a mix between what Sirianni / Steichen ran in 2022 and what Kellen Moore did, really more with Dallas than with the Chargers. And the reason why I say that is because Justin Herbert was hurt last year. Remember, Mike Williams and Keenan Allen were hurt. The Chargers by the end of the year were falling by the wayside. I mean, how much scheme can you really watch of Easton Stick playing quarterback?
Okay, that's fair. But I do have another question for you. Okay. Does it and we'll get more into this when you and I do our Browns-Eagles video collaboration later in the season. But Does it concern you that Kellen Moore was first in Dallas, then he went to LA, now he's on his third different team? Does that aspect concern you at all?
No, I get why people are saying the way that they are. That Dallas did get better technically when Kellen Moore left, and the Chargers fell apart. But I will say this, as I've said about Kellen Moore, in his defense, we all knew Brandon Staley was a terrible head coach, and I don't think that Jim Harbaugh was going to want to keep Kellen Moore as his guy. So I think that was sort of inevitable that he was going to leave the Chargers after that last season. Again, the thing, Dak, did he get better under Mike McCarthy? Yes, he threw for more yards. Yes, the stats were better, but it wasn't like Dak had bad years with Kellen Moore either. I mean, he was very good in that Kellen Moore system, and put up very good numbers. And I think that Kellen Moore is a very good offensive coordinator. And again, I think he's going to bring something different to this Philadelphia Eagles team. I think it's going to be more motion, more to get the ball out quick, more calculated shots. I think they're going to move Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown a lot more than them standing at always at the X for A.J. Brown and the Z for Devontae Smith. So that is one thing that I do like. Again, could it take some time? Yes. I think it could be a little bumpy early. I think there's going to be some kinks they're going to have to work out in this game against Green Bay. But I think over time, Kellen Moore will prove to be a very good, confident offensive coordinator.
Okay, fair. But when you look at the NFC, it's gonna. I feel like the NFC East is gonna come down to Philadelphia and Dallas. Maybe Washington is somewhat in the mix. You have them making the playoffs. I do not. Um, and I'll give you credit for that. You believe more in Jaden Daniels. I just think he's going to have a bit of a rookie season, and I don't love the Washington defense and stuff other than their defensive line. So I think that's going to be more of their Achilles heel. But it's like you look at the overall NFC picture. You've got San Francisco, you got Detroit, you got Philly, Dallas is in the mix, Green Bay, Chicago, Atlanta, Tampa Bay. There's all these teams, and there's only 7 spots. So this game could have a big impact, even though it's only week 1.
It's one of the things I love about the NFL. We always talk about, because I tell you this all the time. In basketball, the first week of the regular season or whatever, even though, let's say, it's a big, what's this go, Mavericks Nuggets. Let's say it's an NBA Finals, or excuse me, let's go Mavericks Celtics. Let's say it's an NBA Finals rematch. Well, it's game 1 of 82. It really has no merit. In the NFL, you have 17 games, and 70 to 75% of the league is probably in that 8 or 9 or 9 and 8 range. So, yeah, week 1, it's week 1. You got to iron out the kinks. You're going to get better as the season goes on, but the games absolutely matter.
And there's going to be some games where I think there's more of an emphasis on them. Like, for example, the Dolphins-Browns game late in the season. There's a reason that game is, as of right now, scheduled to be on Sunday Night Football, because that game could possibly have major playoff implications.
When we went over the schedule when it got released in May, I'm pretty sure I remember telling you this on air. I have never seen an NFL schedule, at least when it comes to primetime games, more balanced in my life. And that is a credit to the NFL, it's a credit to the networks, and it's a credit to the teams. I have went through the Thursday night schedule, the Sunday night schedule, the Monday night schedule. There are very few games, in my opinion, that will have the opportunity to be flexed.
Yeah, I think there are some games.
But I feel like we say that every year, and the game we all think is going to be one of the greatest games of the year has a 4-12 team versus a 5-8 team.
Yeah, I know, like, they have Bengals Giants on Sunday Night Football, I think. So that game could get flexed. But let's circle back to, like, Packers Eagles. I would say this is a little bit more of a must win actually for the Green Bay Packers because
Whoa.
and the reason I'm saying that is because, you know, I was high on the Packers this past season as we've been talking about. It's up to the Packers to kind of come out in week 1 against a team that was in the Super Bowl just a couple seasons ago and really should have beaten the Chiefs in that Super Bowl. But it's
You have to remind me.
I sorry. But my point though is this. Like everybody's high on the Packers. I've seen some people saying they're going to win the division over the Detroit Lions, all this and that. This is a must win for the Packers to kind of justify that and say, yeah, we are here to stay. Like last year was not a one off.
Speaking of games and teams that need a win, both these two teams coming up, they could potentially be going in opposite directions depending on this game. It's a big game, Josh. The New York Jets, Aaron Rodgers, pretty much a year in his return on Monday night. Of course, to that game at home against the Bills last year where he tore his Achilles, he comes back to take on a Niners team who all of a sudden does have Brandon Ayuk and does have Trent Williams.
Yes. And think about this. In his first game back, who is Aaron Rodgers going against? The same guy who he got injured against on Monday Night Football last year. I believe Leonard Floyd is with the 49ers now.
Oh, that's an interesting element that I never even thought about.
Yeah. So, how's that going to play psychologically in Aaron Rodgers' mind?
Well, it's an ayahuasca mind, so I don't even know if Aaron Rodgers realizes it or cares about it.
He might be in the dark right now.
This, this is an interesting game. And again, you know that on this show, at least, more on Brandon's world, just because of our nature, and I know that you don't want to talk spreads a lot. I don't bring up spreads a ton on this show, but I think it's significant to talk about this spread because when this game first came out, the San Francisco 49ers were favored by 6. That line in May has now come pretty much all the way down in half. It went back up to 4 today because of the Trent Williams news, but it was down to 3.5. And I think there's a sense here, and we talked on it with San Francisco. They had a very noisy and distracted offseason. Did they get their deals done ultimately? Yes. But those guys were not practicing, and we know what's on the horizon this offseason, and that's paying Brock Purdy or moving on from Brock Purdy. You can't really do both. You want to keep the roster you have, you probably got to find a different quarterback. So there's a lot of pressure on the Niners. And if Aaron Rodgers flops with the New York Jets, then the Jets, everybody's getting fired. Robert Saleh, Joe Douglas, Aaron Rodgers will probably go retire, and we'll never hear from him again.
Or he goes to the Minnesota Vikings.
Which would be comical, just like Brett Favre did. Remember, Aaron hated Brett Favre for all those years, yet he literally has followed Brett Favre's career path. With that being said, I think there's more pressure on the San Francisco 49ers to win this game because I have already penciled the Jets in to lose this game in May, and I thought the Jets could get off to a 5-2 or 6-2 start and be fine. If San Francisco, again, I think they'll be fine, but there will be more questions to me about the Niners moving forward. If they lose this game, there will be the New York Jets because the Niners are just a better football team.
I'm trying to look up the 49ers schedule because I want to see what they have following this game against the Jets. Like weeks. Okay, so they're at Minnesota, then they're at the Rams. Then they host the Patriots, host the Cardinals, and then at Seattle.
So that's doable. I would say there's some tricky games in there. At Seattle is always tricky.
Especially because that's on Thursday Night Football.
And they own the Rams. So, but again, who knows what the Rams are going to be this year if Stafford can stay healthy. Arizona, to me, is a very sneaky game, like we talked about.
Yeah. They also have Kansas City in mid-October. And then you look at the Jets' schedule. I'll pull that up. So they have the 49ers, then they're at the Titans,
That's a
then then they host the Patriots, then they host the Broncos, and then they're at the Vikings in London, and then they come back and host Buffalo.
to me worst case scenario there. That would be what, 5 games?
Uh,
Worst case scenario, they're 3-2.
yeah. The games I could see them losing in that stretch are at the 49ers, and I could see them losing at home to the Broncos.
I
Possibly.
couldn't. I cannot see them losing to Denver. I think the London games are weird. Who knows what the London games are? They're better than Minnesota. At Buffalo, they probably split with Buffalo, so I'll give Buffalo the win at home.
No, that game's in New
Oh,
Jersey.
it's in New Jersey. Okay, I would take the Jets then.
Okay. So, yeah. At Tennessee could be a bit of a tricky game, being that they'll be coming off of basically a short week where they have to come back from the West Coast.
Here's what I'll say: if the Jets lose to San Francisco, I will immediately bet them whatever the spread is against Tennessee. They will destroy Tennessee, even on a short week.
Coming
They will
back from the West Coast.
They will be angry, they will be mad, and they will play well. It's the bounce back theory. It happens every year.
Okay. Um, I've seen some people being high on the Titans, actually.
Yeah, I have a buddy of mine, big Commanders fan actually. Can you believe it? The one Commanders fan I actually like. He's pretty high on the Tennessee Titans. I don't buy him. You don't buy him. You have him worse record than New England. So
Yes. But anyway, so thinking about those two schedules, because I think that's a huge part of this game, I gotta say it's more important for the Jets because I would say their schedule is a little bit more favorable than the schedule we looked at for the
I
49ers.
agree with what I'm saying. It's not as important because they can lose this game and be fine.
And I understand that argument, but at the same time, if you win this game, then you you look at the rest of those games and you're like, okay, that's not as daunting. That's not as daunting. Like you feel better about yourself.
No, I agree with that though too. If the Jets win this game, there's a world out there they start 6-0.
Yeah,
And then you got your path. I'm not saying they're going to do it, but if the Jets win this game, there is a path out there where you are by the end of week 2 ahead of Kansas City and you are in the driver's seat for the number 1 seed in the AFC, which by the way will matter.
yeah. I mean, again, the Jets' schedule is at San Francisco, at Tennessee, home against the Patriots, home against Denver, at Minnesota, home against Buffalo, at Pittsburgh on Sunday
Sunday
night.
night, I believe. Yep.
Yep. At New England, home against Houston on Thursday night football. At Arizona, home against Indianapolis on Sunday night football. Home against the Seahawks, at the Dolphins, at the Jaguars, home against the Rams, at Buffalo, and then home against the Dolphins.
That's why it's important for them to take care of their Tennessees, your New Englands, your Minnesotas, and even I know you like Denver more than I do. I think Denver's going to be okay. I don't think they're going to be a 10-win team like you do.
Okay.
So I have Denver at 7 wins. You have them at 10. Like that was one of our major differences in our predictions. You had Denver in second place in the AFC West.
Yes,
The
and I
final
had the
playoffs.
Yes, I had the Broncos getting that final wild card spot. But that Jets Jaguars game late in the season could be important in determining something in the AFC playoff picture.
I agree with you there. Well, Josh, we talked about a ton of games already, but let's get into it. There may be already some games on our list that we have already dived into, but our top 5 week 1 NFL games, I'm going to let you go first.
So before I get into this, you know what I find interesting is from what I've seen through, on the schedule, I feel like there's usually a lot of divisional games in week 1. That's not the case this season. There's only 3 divisional matchups in week 1. You you've got let me go through them.
I know there's Houston and Indianapolis,
Yep, you've got Houston, Indianapolis, Raiders, Chargers, and then the other one was
Panthers, Saints.
Panthers, Saints. I think that's to me that's a fascinating aspect of this whole
I'll
thing.
tell you what's fascinating. And again, I hate to bring up spreads, but you know how I am when it comes to the sports betting and stuff.
Yeah,
Uh, uh, a lot of these games are 2.5 to 3 point favorites. And if you're in a survivor pool this weekend, I'm just going to give people some advice here. I literally think, and I'm going to bite my words on this because they're going to somehow pull an upset because it's week 1. I think the only option you have for Survivor, the only team that I have locked in to win a game this weekend is Cincinnati against New England. That's it.
okay. So getting into my list, number 1, this was kind of easy. You might think it's the team behind me, but no. I'm it's not Cowboys Browns at 1. My number 1 game this weekend, Sunday Night Football, rematch of the NFC wild card game, which came right down to the final seconds. Matthew Stafford going back to Detroit, Rams, Lions. I think this is going to be another fantastic game, just like in last year's playoffs. Again, this is another game that could have massive ramifications on the playoff picture later in the season. And I can't wait to see what the environment's like in Detroit. Sunday Night Football, Stafford's first regular season game in Detroit as an opponent. You've got Jared Goff. You've got Dan Campbell against Sean McVay. Amon-Ra St. Brown versus Cooper Kupp. How do the Rams replace Aaron Donald? This game just has so many fascinating storylines. I can't wait. So then, obviously, number 2, America's team against the Browns. I mean, you've got the kind of coincidence, the fact that both starting quarterbacks wear the number 4 for their jerseys. But think about it. Dak Prescott on one side, he's trying to prove that he deserves a contract extension from the Cowboys. Or on the flip side, he's trying to audition to be the starting quarterback for another team, whether it's the Titans or the Giants or maybe the Saints even. And then on the other side of the ball, you've got Deshaun Watson trying to prove that, yes, the Browns made the right decision by giving up all the assets they gave up, giving him the massive contract extension, or contract, I should say. So you have all that. And then you have Micah Parsons against Myles Garrett. The fact that the Browns were willing to trade Amari Cooper for Brandon Ayuk. How does that factor into this game? Plus, you have the revenge factor of Amari Cooper against the Cowboys. So, again, I just look at the storylines in that game and it fascinates me. Number 3 might surprise you a little bit, but I'm going with Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals against the Buffalo Bills. You and I both said the Cardinals could be a very feisty team this season. We both were saying that they could be a team that maybe factors into the NFC playoff picture down the stretch. Neither of us had them making the playoffs, but we both kind of said like they could be a team that affects the playoff picture. And then on the other side, you have Buffalo with Josh Allen. And how do they look on offense now? Do they stay with that run first game with James Cook? Do they go back to throwing the ball all over the yard? Who's their number 1 wide receiver now? How does Marvin Harrison look in his first game? So I like that game a lot. I'm going to, with number 4, I'm going to go down to Florida. Jacksonville Jaguars, Miami Dolphins. This is another game where Like we saw Jacksonville collapse at the end of the season. Can they bounce back and get back to where they were in 2022, I believe it was? You know, and then on the other side, Miami. It's not the early part of the season where we have questions about Miami. It's late in the season, but still, if the Dolphins want to put themselves on a path towards potentially getting home field advantage in the AFC playoffs, this could be a game that matters because, again, Jacksonville could be a factor in the AFC playoff picture. Miami could be a team that factors into the AFC playoff picture. So you have that game. And then at number 5, um, I'm going to the to the official debut of Caleb Williams taking on the Tennessee Titans at home. You know that crowd's going to be hyped up in Chicago. Can Caleb Williams go out there and deliver? Or could it be like when the 2019 Browns took the field against the Tennessee Titans, coincidentally, and they had all the hype and all that? Again, not the same situation, but it feels like a fair comparison.
Well, they
And
also had Freddie Flipping Kitchens as their head coach.
okay, but again, it feels like a bit of a fair comparison, at least in my opinion. But, we saw what happened. The Browns in that game got whooped 43-13. So, do the Bears come out and, put on a show? Or do they come out and lay an egg and somehow allow Tennessee to steal that one?
All right, Josh, out of your 5 games you mentioned, how many do you think I have on there?
I mean, we were both talking about top 5, so I would think you would have at least 5.
No, I'm talking about how many of the games do you think are similar that you and I both picked?
Oh, I'm going to say 2.
One. That's it. One game.
1. Okay.
One game. And I'm going to be honest, I don't hate your list at all. It's going back to my previous point. It's why I said I think this week 1 is the strongest week 1 in the history of the National Football League. Because 4 of your games to me were very hard for me to leave off the list. There are so many fascinating games. I really couldn't pick 5, but I had to narrow it down to 5. So I'm going to start with the number 1 game. You know the game that's most important to me, obviously. Friday night in Brazil, Packers, Eagles. We talked about it a little bit earlier. We had the element of will the Philadelphia Eagles follow up a brand new season, or will it just carry over from the past season in terms of their collapse? Can Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers prove me wrong, prove you right, follow up on the tremendous way they finished the season last, and potentially catapult their way to maybe even an NFC North title? Game number 2 was the game that you add first on your list. The only game we agree with. Rams, Lions. You already set the stage for it. Sunday Night Football. Jared Goff, Matthew Stafford again in Detroit. We both have the Lions making the Super Bowl this year. Do I say no more? The third game I have on my list is opening night. Ravens Chiefs. We talked about it in the A block of tonight's show. Lamar Jackson going up against Kansas City. Can Baltimore get the ghost of Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, to the Kansas City Chiefs, psyching out of their head from last year's AFC Championship debacle, which was one of the worst game plans Todd Monken, usually a very good offensive coordinator, had put together. 4 and 5 were very tough. I could have went with Jags Dolphins. I could have went with Bears and Titans. I could have went with Cowboys Browns. But I wanted to go with 2 other very interesting games to me.
How close was Cardinals Bills to making your list?
Cardinals Bills was 6.
Okay.
So at number 4, I have Texans Colts. I am very fascinated by how CJ Stroud comes out in year 2. Is he going to ascend or at least be the same as he was in year one? We talked about the additions last week of Stephon Diggs and Joe Mixon. We talked about the pressure that is on the Houston Texans this year because we both believe Bobby Slowick is going to be a head coach really soon. We both believe the window is now for Houston to strike. We also talked about the fact the Colts won 8 games last year with Gardner freaking Minshew, a quarterback. Anthony Richardson never finished a game. Now Shane Steichen's got the whole year, the whole offseason to work with Anthony Richardson, not a lot of film on him. This could be a very sneaky game here. There's a reason to me why Houston's only favored by 2.5 and not by 4 or 5. I think there's some money coming in on Indianapolis. I kind of think that's a pick 'em game myself. It's week one. Anything can happen.
So let me just comment on that before you get to your fifth game. It's kind of similar to what we were saying about Jordan Love, because now teams have had a whole offseason to see what CJ Stroud can do. How is he going to adjust to what the defenses are going to throw at him? How are the defenses going to adjust and throw something different at him? That's going to be interesting.
The fifth game on my list is the Arthur Smith revenge game. Steelers, Falcons, 1 o'clock in Atlanta, Georgia, Pittsburgh. Russell Wilson is their only offensive captain. Does that mean something? Does that not mean something? What's their situation going to look like? Is this Mike Tomlin's start to his last year in Pittsburgh? Atlanta, very interesting for Atlanta because I told you last week they start off the year with Pittsburgh at home, Kansas City at home, and they got Philly on the road there on a Monday night in between, and we all know how Kirk Cousins does in primetime games. I told you last week that I believe the Atlanta Falcons could start the season 0-3 and still win this NFC South division. But I am fascinated to see how a Zach Robinson as OC led offense with Kirk Cousins, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, Drake London. Now you bring in the defense side of the ball with Justin Simmons and Matthew Judon. How does this all come together for an Atlanta team who has a lot of hype around them? And historically, every time the Falcons have hype around them, they fall flat on their face.
Or they pull off 28-3.
Yes.
So, I do think it's interesting that you don't have Cowboys Browns on there.
Unlike you, I don't think there's a ton of storylines in that game. I think it's two non-playoff teams. I really do.
It's interesting you say that because yes, when we made our predictions last week, I had the Browns as a playoff team, but I've been giving it some more thought, and now I'm not so sure if the Browns are going to make the playoffs. There's a couple teams, one from the AFC North, another from the AFC South, that I'm looking at and saying maybe they'll make the playoffs instead of the Browns.
I'm worried about the Browns' offensive line. And by the way, I think Dallas is a pop gun offense without CeeDee Lamb. And I don't think this is going to be a very high scoring game. I think it's going to be like 16-13.
Okay. That could favor the Browns, though.
And I agree with that.
So, but I mean, again, we talked about it at the beginning of this segment. The fact that there are only 3 divisional games, I like that. I kind of wish there were no divisional games in week 1 and you put all the divisional games like later in the season. Like
they've done with Pittsburgh and Chicago this year. 6 out of their last 8 games are all division games.
Okay, I'm not necessarily saying that, but maybe like start most of the division games like in week 5, week 6, something like that. Like
I think the NFL is trying their hardest to give most of their division games in the back half, so they're giving a couple early.
Okay. But it's just like, how important division games are. I like the idea of like Buffalo hosting Arizona to start this season because, again, it's like Arizona doesn't go to Buffalo normally, you know.
I'll say this. I'll give a bonus prediction on championship rings right here.
Go ahead.
Arizona wins outright. Take the points for sure. But I think Arizona wins outright. 5.5 line.
I like it. But again, that's why I put that game on my list. Not that I like your list. Like, trust me, Ravens, Chiefs,
That's what I'm saying. It can find me a bad game. I even am fascinated by Panthers Saints. I want to watch Bryce Young. I want to see what that new offense looks like.
yeah. I mean,
Maybe Chargers Raiders, but I want to see Harbaugh. I do.
I want to see what the Raiders look like with Antonio Pierce as their full-time head coach now.
By the way, at a game that we both didn't have on our list that I was highly considering, Commanders, but I think that's a fascinating game. Jaden Daniels' his first start. Going into Tampa in that hot sun against Baker. First game without Dave Canales, as we talked about.
Yeah. I would even say Vikings Giant. Maybe Vikings.
That's the one game. I'll say that is the one. I hope the Vikings destroy the Giants by 30. That's how bad I think. I don't want to watch 1 second of Giants football. They are, and you know what? Patriots Bengals. I hate to say it. I want to see what New England looks like with Gerard Mayo. I don't think they're going to be good, but could they shock the world? Who the hell knows?
Yeah. But Vikings Giants, I'm just like, okay. Like,
Yeah.
Danny Derps is going to force it to Malik Neighbors probably 30 times. Yay.
All right, let's get into some college football because USC upset LSU. Florida State is 0-2. And that's pretty much it this week for college football. I mean, besides that, there was a lot of blowouts.
Yeah. I mean, I would say the best game probably was Saturday night in College Station. Notre Dame against Texas A&M. Number 7 Notre Dame goes into College Station, a very difficult place to win, and they come out of there with a 10-point win. So
I'll put USC LSU over that only because who the hell knew USC figured out how to play defense?
I know, but I think if I had to say my most impressive win, I gotta say the Miami Hurricanes against the Florida Gators.
Yeah.
Because historically, the Swamp is a very difficult place for opponents to go into and win. Florida usually is a very good, they can have their time when they're great, but usually they're a very good football team. So for Cam Ward and the Miami Hurricanes to go in there and basically control that game from start to finish, for me, it was the most impressive.
For Mario Cristobal, who of course was the former head coach at Oregon, to rebuild that Miami program potentially that quickly to me is very impressive. And I think Miami is here to stay. We know, along with Texas and USC and Ohio State and Georgia and Bama and name them, they're sort of a blue blood in college football. And I do think right now we are entering, and the ratings show it this weekend, a golden time in college football, even though there wasn't a ton of competitive games, and you still have some problems in college football early in the season with these blowouts. But when the big brands are good, college football is good.
Yeah. I don't love the fact that we get like Ohio State hosting Akron where you get like, 52-6 or
that was a joke. I think Georgia showed Dabo Sweeney the door to the transfer portal. We'll see if Dabo decides to use it. Clemson is now an average football program again. That was my biggest takeaway. I thought that game would be a little bit closer.
Yeah.
How about Oregon? Did Oregon just not care? Did they just not show up for the second half? That was strange to me.
Yeah. They fell 4 spots in the rankings because of that game.
I mean, Dylan Gabriel's good. My guess is they'll be the second biggest Big Ten team next to Ohio State, and they're probably waiting, but I think it's October 13th for that matchup in Eugene against
October 12th, yep.
October 12th, yeah.
Yes, I have that game circled on my calendar. Even though I'm not an Ohio State fan, I'm not an Oregon fan, I can't wait to sit down and watch that game.
and again, we talked about this. I'm gonna watch more college football than ever. You obviously are a big college football fan. I have started to get a little bit more into college football. I want to see college football. They've done it a little bit. We'll get to this in a minute with Texas and Michigan. We saw USC and LSU this weekend. Could we get I don't know. What if you just do one conference game to start the year? Could we do Ohio State, Penn State week one? Could we do something to make week one actually matter?
I know. Like my we got Miami at Florida. We got Notre Dame at Texas A&M. Like you're basically asking for bigger games like that.
Yeah,
Which
and I mean, like Georgia Clemson on paper was going to be a good game, and Georgia wiped the floor with them.
yeah, and that wasn't really a neutral site game anyway because it was in Atlanta, which is basically Georgia's second home.
It is Georgia. I mean, it's Atlanta, Georgia. It's in the States. So,
Yeah, but I'm saying Georgia normally plays their home games in Athens,
yeah.
not so. But
Again, I just think, like, if I'm and again, the college football coaches, they make their own schedule, whatever. We know it's all about NIL. We know college football still has some weird things that they need to work out. But I do think it was a relatively successful weekend. The fact that we are getting massive ratings on Labor Day, by the way, is a good thing for NFL expansion, if you know what I mean.
yes, but I don't know what's up with Florida State. 0-2, and now you had to play Memphis.
They're already out of the college football playoff. You
Oh
can't
yeah,
lose two games like that. They're done. I mean, their season's done.
yeah,
A fan doesn't. You don't even have to watch them for the rest of the year. If I'm a fan, I'm like, my season's over. I'll see you in February.
yeah. I mean, there could be a 2-loss team that still makes it into the college
Yeah,
football
but
play.
not if you lose to those two.
Oh no,
I mean,
I'm not.
I think even a three-loss team, if Penn State has three losses, or I don't know, LSU, if their losses are to USC, Alabama, and Georgia, let's just say those three. If they kick everybody else's ass, they're probably a 12 team, a number 12 seed with the expanded playoff.
Yeah. So I know Ohio State and Georgia agreed to a home and home series in a few years, and I believe Ohio State and Alabama agreed to a home and home series in the coming years. So you're gonna get games like that.
It's not until like 2027 though, right? Or
Yeah,
2020.
or 2030, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is.
I mean, think the realignment has a lot to do with that, though.
Yes.
You can't deny that. Ohio State was going to play Oregon in a home and home series, but then I think COVID canceled the game that was supposed to be in Oregon.
And now we get it this year.
Exactly.
All right. Well, speaking of the Big Ten, Michigan, who I think just took it sort of easy in the first half in their game Saturday night as they were preparing for number 3 Texas to come to town, featuring Quinn Ewers, the former Ohio State transfer, Steve Sarkisian, obviously. I really like Texas. I think they got NFL guys everywhere. Obviously, quarterback, receivers, defensive line. I think Michigan, it's going to be so hard to get back to the level where they were a year ago. They lost like half their team. They lost their head coach. I'm not saying this is going to be a blowout, but I could see a world, and this is a noon game, by the way.
Yep.
This is on Fox. I could see a world where Texas absolutely destroys Michigan.
I could definitely see it. By the way, this is a top 10 showdown. It's number 3 at number 10. College game day and big noon kickoff are both going to be at this game. Understandable. It's always interesting to me when both of those programs go to the same game. Because I'm curious how fans decide which of them they're going to go to and be part of.
It's also a noon kickoff, so you're theoretically getting the best game of the day at noon.
Yeah. And then the night game on ABC is NC State versus Tennessee in that Duke's Mayo Classic thing. I don't know. Um, so maybe this should have been the national championship last year, but and who knows who would have won that game if that had been the case. But we saw Quinn Ewers. He looked like a Heisman level quarterback last or this past weekend, but Texas wasn't really facing hard level competition.
I think they beat like Eastern Colorado or someone 55-0 or something like that.
I think it was Colorado State.
Colorado State. Okay, I knew it was some Colorado.
Yeah. But yeah, and Arch Manning got time to play.
For first career passing and rushing touchdown.
Yay!
A guy who I believe will be a future number one overall pick in 3 years.
Most likely because he is a Manning. But uh, yeah, I got Texas winning this game. And Michigan could keep this game close because of their defense.
Yeah.
But I just think Texas has too overpowering of an offense.
I agree. I think Texas has too many players. I think Texas is going to be really good this year. I think they're going to be a top 4 team in the country. They're ranked number 3 right now. By the end of the year, they could be number 2. I actually think, and I know you're not going to like this as a Penn State fan, I think Ohio State's probably the best team in the country this year. I just think they're absolutely loaded. Chip Kelly is offensive coordinator now. They got their Michigan monkey out their back with Jim Harbaugh no longer being there. I don't think there's anything stopping Ohio State but themselves from winning the national championship this year.
I'm looking at like the receiving stats for Texas. They were pretty balanced. Isaiah Bond, the transfer from Alabama, he had the high with 5 receptions. Everybody else had like anywhere from 4 to 1. So that's a pretty balanced receiving game for Texas. And then you look at their rushing game, everybody had like the 2 main guys had either 11 carries or 10 carries, and they both averaged almost either 70 yards or 60 yards. So, pretty balanced offense by Texas.
We're going to move on. We're going to talk baseball because September is here. The MLB call-ups are here. And the MLB has never been more balanced than it has been this season. There are, about 6 or 7 teams within 4 or 5 games of each other for the best record in baseball. Almost every single division, including divisions you would not think. The AL East, the NL West, the AL Central are pretty close. And so the question on the screen here, what MLB races are we looking forward to down the stretch? Could be division, could be wild card.
American League East, Yankees, Orioles. The Orioles are only a half game behind the Yankees. I think they play each other one more time late this month. I believe that series is it's in New York. It is September 24th to September 26th. So that's going to be a huge series. And you look at these two teams. The Orioles, they were the number 1 seed in the American League last season. Yankees finally trying to get back to the World Series and win it for the first time since 2009. I think this is going to be a fascinating race.
And if you remember, the Orioles were my preseason, if you will, or spring training MLB pick to win the World Series this year. I agree with you. I think that's a fascinating race. And the other fascinating part about it is the winner of that division is either going to get more than likely the number 1. They could get the number 2 if Cleveland or Minnesota or Kansas City get hot down the stretch and catch them. But the winner of that's going to at least get a first round bye in the MLB wildcard round. The loser is probably going to be the 4. But again, if one of the AL Central in that 3-team race gets odd, could they be the 5 and after, potentially go on the road in that wild card round? It's possible. They could have a better record than the second place team in the AL Central, but because of the way the seeds work, they may have to go on the road.
Yeah. What about you? What division or what race are you looking at?
For me, it is our division. It is the AL Central, only because I'm shocked with how competitive it is. You remember in spring training, I had our Guardians winning the division at 85 games. I thought Minnesota was going to have a down year. I did not think Kansas City was ready to compete. Boy, was I wrong. But this injury to Kansas City's first baseman, Vinny
Oh,
Pesentino,
Pasquantino, yeah.
Escondino could be a big injury for Kansas City. They've now lost, I think it's six in a row. With us now playing them as well again tonight and tomorrow night. Cleveland back on a hot streak after they were falling off the wayside. Me and Josh talked about this last week off the air. Kansas City at that time, had won, I think, three straight against Cleveland. And, I said Kansas City may end up winning the division. And here we are a week later, and they're 3.5 back. So I don't know if any of those three teams could win a World Series. I don't think any of them have the pitching to do so. But that race is going to be fascinating because if you're Baltimore or if you're Houston, who's now looking like they're going to pull away from the AL West, do you want to play a Kansas City or a Cleveland or a Minnesota? Depending on the right matchup, I mean, we know in baseball, whoever gets hot is usually the favorite.
Yeah. I'm also looking at the NL wild card race because it looks like San Diego and Arizona are most likely going to grab the top two spots. But then you have teams like the Braves, the Mets, the Cubs are still in the mix. St. Louis, San Francisco. The battle for that third wild card is really where I'm looking because we've seen the Braves do this where back in 2021 their general manager, I forget his name off the top of my head. He made all those trades, reworked the entire outfield, and they went on to win the World Series. So we've seen the Braves do this, but they're dealing with a number of injuries again. Can they hold on? Can the Mets catch them? Is there a world where the Cubs could potentially catch them? The Giants are still in the mix. The Cardinals.
And
So
then those are a lot of blue blood franchises with a lot of playoff experience. And also, don't forget, Arizona was a wild card last year, and they made it to the World Series.
Texas, I believe, was a wild card team, and they won the World
They
Series.
were, and I want to point this out about Texas. This could be for Guardians fans. This could be for Phillies fans. This could be for Dodgers fans. They end up losing that division. People forget last year in September, the Texas Rangers flat out collapsed and they lost the AL West on the last day of the season after leading it from day one. They lost it on the last day of the year to Houston and they still won the World Series. And you can make an argument they might have had an easier path in the wild card round. So,
I mean, yeah, because they had to go to Tampa Bay, who,
who was falling apart because of the Wander Franco issue.
yes, and there was like nobody in the ballpark anyway.
And they still have not recovered from that, by the way.
No, the Rangers probably aren't going to make the playoffs this season, for
No.
God's sakes.
I mean, so, you take a look at it, it's really anybody's ball game. As I said to kick off the segment, there's going to be, 12 MLB teams to make the playoffs. I think you can make a case all 12 could win the World Series this year.
I mean, we've seen all wild card matchups before in the World Series. Last year, 2014, 2002. It's happened.
Baseball is the sport where momentum matters more. Now, again, for a team like Cleveland, where we're so young, it would be nice to have home field advantage. I think we both agree on that. But it's not a necessity.
I would say it's a bit more of a necessity for a team like Cleveland because they're young and we've seen how like Tanner Bybee and Gavin Williams and when he's healthy, Shane Bieber, Tristan McKenzie, they they pitch better when they're at home. So I would say home field advantage is a little bit more critical for a team like Cleveland.
I think right now, speaking from our perspective, I actually think I'd rather probably play Baltimore than play Kansas City. I think Kansas City's in our head.
Huh. Okay.
I think Kansas City's more of a threat to us than Minnesota is, at least right now.
Yeah, Minnesota's ahead of Kansas City in the division standings. I can tell you that.
We took care of Kansas City last night, but again, Kansas City had a very hot August. The question for me now is, have they peaked too early?
Yeah, Kansas City is a game behind Minnesota in the standings.
And same thing here with like Arizona. You know, can they beat the Dodgers in the postseason after they can't beat them in the regular season? We saw it a year ago.
Right. I mean, you look at the American League wild card right now. The top three are Baltimore, Minnesota, Kansas City, but you still have Boston in the mix.
Boston's 4.5 or 5 back. I don't. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I don't think any of those teams are going to be the playoffs. I
Okay.
think I think that whoever loses the AL East will be a wild card, and whoever doesn't win the AL Central, those will be your other two wild cards.
Okay. So
I think
you don't think like Boston, Detroit, Seattle, none of them factor in?
the only one that I think could is Boston, and that's if Kansas City's collapse continues.
Yeah.
But
As of right, yeah,
I
you're right. The Royals have lost 6 in a row.
with 4.5 game lead, and you got 26 days, and you have an off day in there, so you probably have about 25 games to go. You figure if you go 500 in that stretch, the other team's gonna have to go, on a crazy, 5 games better than you just to catch you. It's gonna be really hard.
Yeah. So
So, all right. Well, we're going to end tonight's show. I'm going to recap Bash in Berlin. Josh is going to talk AEW All Out. I don't want to spend a ton of time on Bash in Berlin. I thought it was, again, a very good show. As always, it seems with these premium live events. We talked about the Kevin Owens heel turn last week, Josh. I was begging for it, even when it was happening. Sadly, did not happen. I do think that hopefully Kevin Owens does turn heel this coming Friday, the last Friday night ever on Fox for SmackDown. Close out that era with a big moment. I thought Gunther and Randy Orton was just an absolute classic. I know you said you haven't watched Bash number Win, but go back and watch that match. I thought it was a phenomenal masterpiece of a encounter with Randy Orton and Gunther. Very little interference. I thought Cole and Wade Barrett on commentary did a really good job at pointing out that Charles Robinson, the official, veteran official, he let a lot of things go in that match. And I also love the direction they're going now post Bash in Berlin, running back Gunther and Sami Zayn. I think that's a very interesting match for Bad Blood. And again, I enjoyed Rhea and Damian versus Dom and Liv. Gonna lead to the big Hell in a Cell match. I thought Punk and McIntyre absolutely tore the house down in that strap match. I thought that was, if Gunther and Randy Orton was not perfect, I thought that was the best match of the night. And they followed it up with an even bigger angle on Raw last night with Drew McIntyre absolutely kicking the beats out of CM Punk and then shoving them down his. That definitely I want to sell. Very excited for that feud. But again, overall good show. Nothing to out of the ordinary. Just a good classic 3-hour PLE. Get in, get out. Very entertaining Saturday afternoon.
okay. So we just had AEW All In a couple weeks ago at Wembley Stadium in London, where Bryan Danielson became your new AEW World Champion by beating Swerve Strickland. So his career is not over, as that match was title versus career. Will Ospreay and MJF put on an absolute classic, and you had Daniel Garcia interfering in that match and screwing over MJF. I'll get back to that in a minute. I thought All In was a very good show, and now we turn around just a couple weeks later and we're doing All Out. And good grief, this might be my favorite feud in AEW history. We are doing Swerve Strickland versus Hangman Adam Page round 4 in a steel cage match. Their first 3 matches have been just awesome. They had just their standard match at Wrestle Dream, which Swerve won. Then they went to just a hellacious Texas death match at Full Gear. And then on just a regular episode of Dynamite, they go to like a 30-minute draw, which led to a triple threat match against Samoa Joe at Revolution for the AEW World Championship. So you have that match. Then you got MJF versus Daniel Garcia, which has been a story they've been building because you had Daniel Garcia challenge Will Ospreay for the International Championship. MJF asks Daniel Garcia if he can be in his corner. MJF basically cost Garcia that match by saying, use the Dynamite Diamond Ring, which apparently was actually stolen in England. I don't know all the details on that. And basically at the end, MJF just destroys Daniel Garcia. He gives him like a second rope, like not a tombstone. It was like a pile driver of some sort. And now they're going to have a singles match at All Out. You've got Statlander versus Willow Nightingale in a Chicago street fight. Bryan Danielson is defending the AEW World Championship against the scapegoat, Jack Perry. I think that's because they're doing that pay-per-view in Chicago, and it ties into the whole CM Punk thing. But yeah, All Out's going to be a very good pay-per-view. It usually delivers.
And with that, we're going to wrap up tonight's edition of Championship Rings. Thank you guys so much for listening. As always, you can subscribe to us on YouTube, Championship Rings 216. Follow us on X at Rings Champion, Instagram at Rings Champion, Facebook at Rings Champion 216. Josh, next week we got Texas, we got Michigan to break down, and we also have week 2 in the National Football League to preview, as well as we got games to go over.
That is correct.
So with that, and then obviously we'll talk about anything that happens at AEW All Out. Again, make sure you guys tune in. We'll be here next Tuesday as always, and thank you for listening to another edition of Championship Rings.
A salute to you.